This is the Ops Game Changers podcast, where we share real-life stories from remarkable leaders that are transforming the world of service operations in financial services, healthcare, and BPOs. In this series, we explore some of the key challenges faced by service operations as they strive to deliver more capacity, more productivity, and more business impact. In each episode, we delve into how these Ops Game Changers have addressed a key challenge or issue. Our guests share how they went about unlocking significant value, adopting best practices, and experiencing some game-changing results.
Hello and welcome to Ops Game Changers, the podcast that shines a light on the crucial role that operations teams have in driving business performance and improving staff and customer experience. My name is Bhavesh. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at ActiveOps, and in each episode, I hone in on one KPI or a challenge that a business has solved. I delve into how they went about doing this, and we explore the outcomes achieved. Now, today, we're joined by Patti Eyers, CEO at First Mortgage Services, to learn about how FMS embarked on a strategy to align finance and ops. Now, Patti's going to share why this was so critical for FMS and the impact this is now having on operational decision-making. But before we jump into the topic, let's welcome Patti to the podcast. So, Patti, welcome to Ops Game Changers.
Thank you, Bhavesh. It's lovely to be here.
So, listen, before we jump into this whole topic of finance and ops, perhaps you can tell the listeners a little bit more about yourself and I guess how you ended up in the role that you're in right now.
Well, I probably ended up here without a lot of planning, actually, Bhavesh. So I'm a bean counter. I'm an accountant by trade.
Right.
And so I grew up, in a management reporting function, very much on the analytical side. And then as I grew up professionally, I ended up in a lot of CFO roles.
Mm-hmm.
But I think because as an accountant, you're able to have quite transferable skills from industry to industry.
Correct.
Kind of counting widgets. And I was able to move from IT industry to building industry to financial services. And I was just really keen to trial different types of workplaces, different types of products. And then one day found myself in a financial services business, which had investment management. It had a bit of financial planning. And it had this corporate trustee business that had acquired a lot of mortgage processing services as an ancillary business, and found myself loving that mortgage processing, that outsource processing business.
Yeah.
And then over time started to run that, and then they threw an insurance business alongside it. So really quite unplanned, but I think I had a lot of opportunities to build different skill sets along the way. So here I am, mortgage processing and insurance.
Who knew, right? That's the start of the journey and how you ended up here. Well, I mean, it's quite interesting because it's similar to being an accountant, being a marketeer. I've had a similar kind of journey where I worked with lots of tech companies that marketed to different industries. So you get to see a lot of different areas and it kind of hones your skills as you go along. So before we jump into ops and finance then, so perhaps tell the listeners a little bit more about FMS and what you guys do.
Yeah, sure. FMS is an outsourced processing business. It acts for lenders as a back office. All right. So we take a loan from unconditional approval all the way through to settlement and registration. And I'm located here in Sydney, Australia. And so we very much operate within the Australian and New Zealand environment. And the legal structure is quite important in that because it impacts, obviously, lending protocols, etc. So we have different jurisdictions, state jurisdictions that have different rules. And this business is able to operate on a national level right across different types of lenders, taking their back office, their back and middle office away from them so that they can focus on the front line of sales and relationships and growing that frontline business. So the business has been here for about 30 years across Australia and New Zealand, and we are a part of a bigger Fortune 500 company. It's an American company that has been around for 130 years. So,
Wow.
So very much portfolio alignment across the globe, which is wonderful. And this business is very much run autonomously in this region. So we're very lucky to be able to be quite innovative about what we do, be quite autonomous and independent in the way we make our decisions and are able to tailor then our business approach to the local market.
Fantastic. So I guess let's kind of delve into that topic, right? And this whole idea of finance and ops, it's quite an interesting discussion, right? Because typically when we talk to ops folks, there's always that, oh, I've got to convince finance in order to be able to invest more, I need more headcount, or all those kind of conversations that you're having. And I guess from a finance point of view, you're trying to understand, what's the return on investment on these things, and how do we actually make sure that we're doing the right thing across the business. So there's always this really interesting relationship between the two. And that's why this your story is so fascinating, because this whole idea of becoming much more data centric across the two functions kind of almost takes away all the mystery, right? It makes it everybody's talking in the same language. So perhaps if I kind of take you back to when this journey started. So what was the rationale? What was the starting point for you in going down this journey?
I guess this, in terms of the journey around operational metrics itself, I would say that, we used to run, this is very much it's almost like a manufacturing style operation. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of handoffs. It's almost like a production line rhythm to this business. And I think that's important to understand.
Yeah.
So we have about anywhere between 300 to 500 staff at any one point, depending on the business cycle and how the property market's going and volumes. And so I guess when you've got a really, really fast-paced business like that, that capacity management piece becomes really important. And if you think about the fact that we're an outsourced provider, the back office is actually the front line, right?
Cool.
So
Yes.
so whereas that process for a lender is actually their back office, but for us, that's our front office. That's the face of our business. It's our front line.
Totally.
And so when you think about capacity planning and hitting those SLAs and those milestones, that's incredibly important. And when you're acting for multiple different lenders with different processes, that becomes very, very complex. So if you imagine managing capacity across that type of operation, we were in the old days, and when I say old days, pre-2011, okay?
Right.
Managing this business through the sheer capability and expertise of each leader, right? So they were making decisions, they were then looking at their P&L, and then of course finance is saying, why are you spending so much money? Your volumes are down, all the things that you just alluded to, yeah? And then managing using, some operational metrics, but simple ones like volume, and then going to their P&L, and then they look at FTEs, or have I got too many people for the amount of volumes I've got compared to, say, a year ago, and that type of comparison to get a sense of whether they are performing well or not. And I think the problem we had was the ability to flex according to that volume curve quickly enough to make it sustainable, consistent, and profitable, but not sacrifice service levels. Right. And so really the problem that we had was just operational transparency. We weren't, I think, clever enough to think about data centricity and linkages to finance. We just wanted some operational transparency. And we wanted to stop talking anecdotally about resourcing. I would ask as a leader operational questions that really needed empirical answers. Not anecdotal stories about, we moved these 3 people here and we moved 4 these people, and you're moving the deck chairs without any net outcome. I was actually after empirical responses, but I wasn't getting them. Okay. So anecdotal explanations to variances and forecasts usually means you're not consistent from one operating line to another. And if you want to drive that consistency and comparison, you need some more formal framework to gather and measure and gather your operational data. And if you think about a finance function, it's very uniform and it's quite prescriptive. So I guess that's where the journey started. We wanted the transparency and we wanted consistency around capacity management.
And I guess, Patti, though, it was driven by uh, by the finance function in this context, right? I mean, what was it like talking to the ops folks? Was there a lot of resistance at that point? Because there is that constant battle, right?
You know, when we look at the need that arose, you started to then having to consider the finance culture versus the operational culture. And that's what you're getting at, Bhavesh.
Yes,
The
totally.
resistance came when we said, okay, finance is now going to manage that program. And they went, wait a second, that's my program, you know? And someone is questioning the integrity of my data because operations has to own the data.
Of course.
Finance owns the structure, the framework, the program, the governance. But operations has to own the data. And that's where you might get some friction.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think you need to explain that to the stakeholders about who owns which part of the program versus the data.
Yeah,
does that make sense?
it makes complete sense. And I think there's a couple of things that you kind of align, bring to life there. One is that whole inconsistency of data across different departments. So, when you're trying to connect it all together, it doesn't add up. There's something not quite right. And it's really common, right, in lots of businesses. And even if I just look at ops generally in large operational environments, there's lots of inconsistencies in even just how you measure certain things like productivity or utilization or whatever those key terms are. So even having a common framework in a department makes such a big difference. So I can, if you just take the upper level and have a common framework across the business, then all of a sudden you've got much more. Well, you can trust the data, and you're much more clear. And I guess trust is probably the next thing to kind of delve into, because the moment you are seeing the data's not adding up, I guess nobody believes the data anymore. And then you've got to try and rebuild that. And did you find that was a challenge that you had to get across?
Yes, that's a massive challenge, right? Because the only reason that you would seek to drive that data together from different functions is because you wanted to use it for decision management, decision support. Okay. And that's where this operational data starts to add a lot of value beyond just managing the day-to-day operations. So the reason to do that, if you think about the fact that the rationale to do that is to add value to the business in pursuit of decision support, right? Now, if your data doesn't add up across the functions, you're going to get dysfunction in those decisions. You're going to make poor decisions because it's based on flawed data. So it's really important to get that integrity. And if you think about using the finance function as a benchmark, that's the most audited, governed data there is in your organization, right? Because you're producing accounts, it's everybody's looking at that, everyone's answering that, you're doing lots of variance analysis. So actually, the variance analysis that is produced by finance oftentimes needs the operational data as the basis of an explanation. And that too has to have synchronization.
Yes.
So there's so many reasons to bring those two together, not the least of which is trust, so that operational data has value. Because if there's no trust, it has no value.
Yes. Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. We've just done some global research across 7 countries, including Australia, New Zealand, UK, Ireland, South Africa, Canada, and US. And we're looking at, from an operational perspective, the level of decision making with data and kind of having to think about where people are. And what we found was really fascinating in the sense that the numbers were quite scary. I think, in the 90s, so like 90% plus of ops leaders, are making decisions based upon data that's older than a week, at least older than a week. So when you're talking about decision support, which is clearly what the data is there to drive, it's there to drive better decision making at the point you need it. And if you're doing that based upon data that's, in some cases 45 days old, I mean, what chance do you have to make a good quality decision for what, at that point in time? And if you layer on top of that AI, which needs good data in order to drive forward-looking things like predictive and prescriptive nature, then all of a sudden you're in a bit of a situation where you can't capitalize on what the potential is of these new technologies. So the data framework is such an important thing that for many, it seems like in ops, it's something that's been overlooked for so many years, and it's now becoming more and more prevalent. And you've been on that journey, obviously, probably ahead of the curve from that perspective. So taking you back in terms of, you've got this driver, you need to solve these problems that you've articulated. How did you actually go about doing it? What were the kind of things that you actually did in order to bring those two worlds together?
Well, I think first you have to train the finance people on the operational methodology in terms of collecting and measuring that data. So the time and motion study. So I think the best way is actually get them to manage that program. So if you have to re-baseline every year, finance runs that re-baselining process. Operational people do the timings, but they project manage that baseline. They govern, access to the systems, and they govern the setup of the system for the rebaselining process, for example. So you need to train the finance people on whatever platform or methodology you use for your capacity management. And then you need to train your operational people on how that data links to the profit and loss statement that they are responsible for, or the expense base that they're responsible for. Then I think, one of the things that we have learned is that you can have finance run the program, but I think as you get more sophisticated about it, what you're looking for in terms of personnel is having operational expertise, say leaders who've been in the business for a long time that are looking for some career progression and are very, very numerate and understand this capacity program and the data. Actually move those operational experts who love analytics and reporting, move them into the finance function, but reporting to a management reporting structure within that finance function. So they're sitting with the finance analysts. Finance love that because suddenly they've got an SME who can explain financial variances in terms of operational metrics, right down to the minute and second and last widget in real time, if you've got the systems and framework. And the operational people suddenly, with that integrated data, are able to almost predict their P&L on a weekly basis because they know that linkage about time and motion with the impact on their cost base.
Yes.
And I think with a lot of this capacity management methodology, the trick is in trying to flex your workforce or your resourcing as close to the volume curve as you can, as close to real time as you can. But actually, by combining data sets, you can see very quickly that if you flex according to the volume curve, very close as real time as possible, intraday, intra-week, the compound effect of small movements is so much larger than taking a big shift or a big cut or a big upscale every 3 months or every month. And when you merge those pieces of data, that's really visible in the reporting for both sides to see. And suddenly they have to work together. They want to work together because making small pivots is much less painful than making tough decisions in larger intervals.
So I think, Patti, what's really fascinating there is that I guess at the most simplest level, what you've done is you've kind of demystified both sides.
Yes.
Right. So there's no more mystique about it. There's no more, well, I don't understand what ops do, and I don't understand what finance do. You've kind of blended the two together, so they both become an important part of the delivery of the outcome. And
they both need each other, Bhavesh.
Exactly.
They need each other to make decisions.
And that's, I guess that would have been, so does that, obviously there is a really interesting takeaway there about picking the right people to go over one side and the other and learning more on both sides and putting somebody from ops into finance that can be your SME. Obviously that the individuals need to be analytical, but also need to understand the ops. And I guess those people are obvious in your team, aren't they? You kind of know who those individuals are. And it's quite a good career progression for them, as you say. And have you seen those people flourish as a result?
Yes, absolutely. And that cannot be overstated. We've seen that. And I think when you talked about, maybe some of the resistance, in making some of these structural changes or handing the baton over to finance.
Yes.
And this structure right now is working incredibly well. And we know that because we've made some really significant and quite, I guess for ops, quite scary changes, because we've cut timings by, in some of those core processes by 70%.
That's amazing.
And that's frightening, right? Because
it is.
so when we do that, because the technology we've put in has enabled those timings, and you can actually clock them, whilst you can see it, it's still frightening to suddenly, feel that you've got to work to a time and motion studies that are 70% less than what they were. So it helps to have a trusted person
Yes.
on the other side of the fence, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it seems that culture that you've now formed across finance and ops is really, it's like an engine that's purring, right?
Yes.
That people are working together really well. So it kind of leads us on to a certain degree. We've already started some of those conversations around. So what's the results? So what has happened? You've talked about some of the innovative tech that you put in order to kind of reduce the kind of servicing time for the things that you're doing. And as an outsourcer, that has a material impact for you in your profitability when you're dealing with the sustainability of a client, but also the service levels you can give to the client and the costs you can provide to become more competitive in these kind of environments. So what have you seen in terms of from a kind of business benefit perspective on this kind of work that you've done to combine the two?
Look, I think we've got to a point where the data that we get from the operations is so well integrated with finance. We do all of our pricing using all of our operational data, because we can capture it by person, by the second, and you can even capture it based on the individual processes that we've timed and the bundled processes that we might be proposing a service for. To a point where if the people that you're putting in a particular team to deliver a particular service, we use that data to price. And so I think from that point of view, that has been really useful. We also, like I said, we look at the pricing of, for example, timesheets on the payroll system to make sure there's integrity in the billing of contracted invoices from agencies, for example. So because we know how much time is spent, we know how much it should cost. You can model that. If the actual invoices come in and the timesheets come in and it doesn't work out that way, we actually validate that. So there's actually savings in that as well, because there's actually a lot of errors in timesheets and agency invoicing. So there are validation pieces like that. There's many aspects of the way operational staff manage their P&L that's really become quite sophisticated. So they can actually project their cost base now. It's really easy for them to use those standard timings versus the actual timings versus the payroll data as an operational leader to basically say, well, if my target is X, or my forecast is X, from my budget it's X, I know exactly which operational levers I need to pull, and exactly how much and how long it'll take me to arrive at that targeted forecast.
So I guess, Patti, that's going back to one of the original things you said around using data for decision support. What you're describing is now the ops individuals, the leaders in operations, are making decisions backed by data, and can also think about forecasting in a better way than they were able to be before. So it's gone from that experience and the hunch that you had and the anecdotal evidence that you were talking about at the start, to now it's based on true fact of data, and data that you guys trust, and everybody is been through the journey together, so they all understand what that data is doing. And that's a big shift, isn't it, in terms of
it's a huge
mindset.
shift, and structurally it's been a huge shift too, because now that we're able to do this, we've been able to change the operational structures to a completely different model. So if you think about a processing business, an outsourced processing business, it's traditionally organized by process. So you might have a settlements team, you might have a document verification team, you might have a document preparation team, and you'll do that right across the business, and they're led by leaders who are experts in those stages of the fulfillment chain. Yeah. But when you've got not only the integration of the data, but the integration of the skill set now, where you've got finance people understanding operations, operational people understanding, every minute's impact on their P&L. We've been able in the last 2 to 3 years to change that whole structure so that we organize that operational business by client, and we can put leaders there that are now skilled to run almost a mini FMS business. And so client by client with their own P&L, right? And because they have the financial skill sets to do that now in combination with that operational data that they're already experts at.
So it's really interesting. I mean, you've got ops people that moved in some way into finance. Did you see anything go the other way? You see finance guys going into ops and becoming those leaders in your autonomous groups?
Well, do you know what? It's interesting because some of our ops leaders came from a financial academic background. So they've got commerce degrees, etc. So it's quite interesting because they've loved this transition.
Yes.
Because they've learned the ops skills, they've got the academic financial skills, and now they're able to put that into practice. But what it has done, it's really enabled the operational parts of finance. So accounts payable, cash management, because we've got a cash management team that runs all the settlement monies, the reconciliations team. So the more operational parts of finance have adopted the practices.
Fantastic.
And the reporting platform and framework that operations use for their operational data. So, it's really had a compound effect across departments.
And in terms of the outcome of this, I mean, it sounds like there's definitely some employee benefits that have come off the back of this. There's career progressions. And in ops generally, I know ops generally has always been, I always say it's like white noise, right? Every year, ops is told to cut 10% or whatever that number is. And it's the pressure they're on all the time in order to do that. So they're always in that mindset, where they should always be in that mindset about further efficiencies and improvement. So anything like this, even though it's scary, it's something that's part of their role in some ways, but it's still a change management thing. Have you seen kind of things like staff morale increase, attrition go down? Have you seen those kind of benefits of employees generally?
Look, I think at a middle management and more senior leadership level for operations, and I'm talking about what we call service delivery managers and team leaders, you've really seen a great engagement with this approach, because they realize at those levels, that as they climb the operational hierarchy, the one thing that's always missing is financial training. So as you go more senior in the operational department, suddenly everybody wants to talk to you about your numbers, right? And your cost base. And actually, in a pure operational function, no one ever really takes the time to sit down and teach you that stuff, unless they send you to a course, which is what we traditionally do. But actually what we're finding is, as they do this, they're getting that financial training. And those leaders, because they know that that's a gap as they progress, because we talk development plans, that type of thing, they welcome this opportunity with open arms, because it's actually filling those development gaps. And they're asking for more. So we put them with a finance mentor as they're progressing through this change. That's one of the things that we do. So we've got finance people that are mentoring them, and sometimes if they've got the finance background, we might give an HR person, just like you might give an HR person mentor if they need more the people management side. This is no different. And we've found that actually the engagement has gone right up for those levels, because they understand this is fulfilling a career gap.
Patti, I think that's such a great takeaway. I can't think of any other companies that I've spoken to, engaged with, that are using finance people as mentors to ops. That's just now you've mentioned it, it's so obvious, why wouldn't you, right? And it makes perfect sense. So that's a great takeaway as well. So in terms of the impact on customers, you talked about the restructuring from a autonomously from a customer by customer perspective. Have you seen a difference in the engagement you have with customers and the results you're able to give your customers as a result of some of this?
Well, absolutely. As I described before, we would not have been able to completely restructure the operation based on customers rather than based on process.
Yes.
We would never have been able to do that. And that in itself, a fully dedicated squad or team or department that purely looks after that customer, and the ability to match leadership in those hubs to the type of customer they are. So sometimes we have large bank customers that are, the machinery it's big machinery that we're working with, whereas on sometimes you've got smaller, more boutique lenders, and they prefer to nurse one deal through one at a time because the volumes are lower. So you need a different style of leadership,
of course,
for each of those customers.
Yeah.
And the fact that we're able to structure it that way because of what we've done around the combination of and integration of data, that in itself, that structure fully points to a greater level of customer centricity.
Completely.
And those leaders that sit in the hub, the hub itself, are then also watching NPS scores that are specifically for that customer, and they own that along with their P&L, along with their operational metrics, and it really is a holistic ownership of that business. So that in itself, I think, is fully pointed towards customer.
Yeah, totally. I think it's, sometimes there's a gap between what ops do and the outcome from a customer perspective, and this way, the ownership is across everybody to make sure they're delivering those outcomes, which is really interesting. So, I mean, it sounds like, you've come a long way from when you first started. I don't think you probably, if you look back now, did you even think you'd get this far at the start? I mean, it feels like a complete transition from start to finish.
Oh, do you know what? We've been at it a long time. I think we first put an operational capacity management program in about 2012, 2011, thereabouts, right? So we've been at this a long time, and we have learned many lessons along the way, and sometimes we've had to learn them more than once. But it really has been a journey, and the last thing I would want your viewers and listeners to think is that we had this all mapped out and we had a vision. We kind of solved one problem at a time, made one mistake at a time. But I think we're quite a learning organization. So we tend to really ponder each fall and pick ourselves up and really analyze it and probably overthink it. But that's the way we've gotten there, to really internalize those any mistakes that we've made, and honestly, sometimes you make them, more than once. And I'll give you one example of that. I'd say that, when we used to always have to come and remediate some of the integrity of the operational data, and we helicopter some, senior operational expert in. Then after a while, you think, well, wait a second, why do I have to bring someone independent in all the time to kind of check and audit that data? And that's when we said, wait a second, it actually needs to sit as an independent governance role, on an ongoing basis. So that's the way we've done it. You really honestly learnt from each stumble.
I never believe anybody that says we had it all mapped out, because it never works that way, does it? You're doing it step by step, and you end up in the path that you're in. So it's a great learning tip, actually, because planning, you can plan whatever you want, but you've got to get yourself meandering your way through it, which is really cool. So looking back then, what's been your proudest moment on this journey?
Actually, my proudest moment is the development of the people.
Yeah.
And I never thought, like you said, I would say that of a program where I'm collecting operational data and madly trying to maintain long-term and day-to-day integrity in that data. But honestly, if you go into any finance function, what you hear time and again, no matter what organization you're in, is from your accounting staff is, I want to learn more about the business. I want to get closer to the business. Have you heard that, Bhavesh? Yep.
Yeah,
I want to
completely.
get more into and marketing people too, I'm sure, right?
Yeah.
They have their subject matter expertise, they have their technical. I want to know about the business. How do I get more embedded in the business? I want to be working, alongside the business. This has been fantastic for the finance staff, and they learn about all of the heartaches and challenges that the operational people go through that you don't get a view on sitting in the finance ivory tower, because that's what it is. And I think because the finance team delivers so much value because they have enterprise-wide access to all types of data, because they're sitting in and they have this aerial view of everything.
Completely.
But the downside of that is they're not really close to the business. So this draws them back and really embeds that in the business, because they need the operational data to explain the variances. And if they manage the program, they're very much entrenched in that business, and there's a greater appreciation by finance staff of the pace and the sheer intensity of an operational department. I think things like that,
they're inspiring, aren't they?
Most proud of.
Definitely inspiring. I mean, I've got, as we wrap this up, Patti, I've got a question to ask you, which it'd be wrong of me not to ask this, bearing in mind I'm talking to a CEO, and as well as the data journey that you've on, and that's the AI question, right? So from a point of view of what you guys are doing, and you talked about innovative technologies, are you exploring AI as part of all of this? What's your view on it, and what do you think it's going to potentially bring for you guys?
Yeah, it's pretty buzzy AI right now. I think what I'd say to you is, being part of a First American Financial Corporation, we're very, very lucky. There's something like 23,000 employees across 60 trading jurisdictions, and First American have a lot of AI programs going, working directly with the AI divisions of Microsoft and Google and the like. So I think we're very lucky because we leverage all of that. And like you rightly said, Bhavesh, it's all about the data in AI. It's rubbish in, rubbish out. There's also a lot of dangers around intellectual property, and how if you're not accessing this technology properly and you're not using it properly, you might overstep the marks of your intellectual property and the marks of others. And so you don't want to cross those boundaries. So we need to progress through that AI journey very cautiously, from a legal perspective, from an information security perspective, from a data security perspective, and we're lucky to have that First American support. The other thing I would say about AI and any other types of technology, there's a lot about robotics before, and in our business, all this stuff is really, really important because we're trying to drive greater throughput, and it's a very competitive space. So whilst we invest a lot in that area, we also have a venture capital arm through First American called Parker 89. So we're very lucky with all that technology. But what I'd say to you is this, that we always have to define the business problem first. What I really don't want this business to do is to go down a path of AI or any other just for technology's sake. We don't want AI just for AI's sake. We need to define a business problem, and AI combined with other levers might be that solution. So I think that's really important to start with that business problem. It's really important to design a solution, an AI solution, carefully, and to be accessing the AI technologies very selectively, and really understand that if you access that technology in one way, are you handing your IP and data over?
Yeah, it's a very important observation, actually.
Yeah. So I'd say we are very much exploring that space. We've had AI for a while, and a lot of people now are moving on to that Gen AI space. So absolutely, we're very, very active in that space, but we do it in a very structured way, and a very controlled way. with a lot of support from data security teams and AI teams, as well as global partnerships.
Yeah, well, listen, thank you for that, Patti. Listen, it's been a absolutely fascinating conversation. I've loved every minute of it, learning more about the journey that you've been on. So I wanted to just thank you for participating, coming on the Ops Game Changer podcast and sharing this fantastic story. And I think there's so many of our listeners who come from an ops side. There's a lot of really great takeaways on how to work with their finance counterparts and potentially work closer together and building that synergy together as units to drive the main business outcomes that business are looking for. So, Patti, listen, thank you so much for taking your time and spending some time with me.
Been an absolute pleasure.
So, and thank you very much for our listeners for joining us. Please do check in to catch up on more episodes of Ops Game Changers to hear more fascinating insights from other leaders in the fields of operations about how they overcame challenges to drive productivity, boost performance, and ultimately drive business outcome. So bye for now.
Today's Ops Game Changers podcast was brought to you by Active Ops. We'd love to hear your thoughts. You can do that by sharing them on our Facebook, LinkedIn, or X feeds, or you can comment in the comments section of the YouTube version of this podcast. And if you've enjoyed what you've heard, please do like and subscribe, and check back soon to hear more valuable insights from other inspiring leaders in operations. Thanks again for listening, and goodbye.